Well, welcome councillors, our executive team, those in the gallery, those that are presenting this evening at our February ordinary meeting of council, those in the media that are also in the gallery, and for those who are listening and tuning in online, welcome to the ordinary meeting. I'd like to declare the meeting open at 4:32. I'd like to acknowledge the Kamilaroi people as the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather, and pay my respects to elders both past and present, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal community members who either may be with us this evening or listening online. If I can now please ask all to be upstanding for prayer. Eternal God, our loving Father, we come to Thee this day in the name of Jesus Christ, who is the lover of our souls and the Saviour of all mankind. May we feel His love and respond to it. May His Spirit shine in lives that are darkened by worry, doubt or fear. Strengthen and guide those who are trying to do what is right. Make it plain to them. Make us more mindful of the needs of our fellow men and less absorbed in the selfish concerns, that Christ may approve and bless what we do here this day. We ask these blessings in His name. Amen. Please be seated. Next, we have bereavements in our community between the 17th of December 2020 and the 17th of February 2021. And as a community, we mourn the loss of Marion Noreen Wilson, Sandra Falconer, Morris Alexander Bull, Ian Roderick Sinclair, Beryl Eileen McKinnon, Janet Lee Silver, William Richard Bailey, Valerie Joyce Howes, Patricia Ann Agave, James Arthur Rossett, Judith Claire Baker, Della Mary Zerner, and Malcolm Wayne Connolly, worked for council since 2014 and unfortunately passed away on Australia Day this year. Councillors, executive team and all members of the gallery, if I could please ask you to be upstanding and join in with me for 1 minute silence as we pay our respects to the deceased and extend our condolences to the family and friends of the deceased. Thank you. Please. Next on the agenda are apologies to those present. I believe we have all elected members with us this evening, and also the executive team with us, and the Chief Financial Officer is absent, but the acting CFO, Mrs. Medley, is with us joining us. So next item on the agenda is confirmation of previous minutes of the ordinary meeting held on Wednesday the 16th of December 2020. I'll now call on an elected member to please move that motion, and seconded So first moved by Councillor Fuller, seconded by Councillor Hook. I'll now put that motion. All in favour? Against? So the motion carried. Item 6 is declarations of interest. We have several registered already from Councillor Hasler in relation to item 10.4 on our agenda, which is the Arts Gunnedah renewal of agreement. Councillor Hasler has lodged a less than significant non-pecuniary interest, and the reason is that his spouse is the Secretary of Arts Gunnedah, and Councillor Hasler has chosen to leave the room during the debate and determination of item 10.4. Next we have Councillor Swain as a registered declaration in relation to 12.6, which is the Tractor Trek vehicle display 2021. Also a less than significant non-pecuniary, as her husband is a member of the organisation that has applied. Councillor Swain, will you be staying in the chambers of determination? Thank you. Next is I have a declaration myself in relation to item 11.5, which is a development application. I've listed that as pecuniary. I'll be leaving the chambers and the Deputy Mayor will be chairing for this item as it relates to a development application for land that will be developed that's owned by myself and my wife. Next we have Councillor Hook, who has declared an interest in relation to item 12.3. And that is a request for fee waiver for riding for the disabled, a less than significant non-pecuniary, and the reason being his wife is the honorary treasurer. Councillor Hook, you for determination. Thank you. I now call for any further declarations of interest in relation to our ordinary February meeting from either elected members or executive team. There are no further declarations. Thank you. We'll move on now to item number 7. Now we have quite a response in relation to our February ordinary meeting of council from community. And we have 11 speakers. So we'll begin with Mrs. Juliana MacArthur, who is President of the Gunnedah Chamber of Commerce. She'll be speaking in relation to item 11.1, the Director of Environmental Services Report, Shop Local and Win Christmas Report 2020. Now, Ms. MacArthur, just to remind you, have 5 minutes. We have 11 speakers speaking this evening, so I'll need to be quite firm on the fact that we will have to keep it to 5 minutes. But I will remind you also at the conclusion of your presentation, I will open up, as I will for all presentations, for elected members should they seek any clarification. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And through you, councillors, I stand here today as President of our local Gunnedah Chamber. I believe the report will speak for itself, but I'm here personally to thank you for passing a motion to provide us with $12,000 worth of support for the campaign. Now that went into local media and a little bit towards the TV coverage that we organised for the Christmas Shop Local campaign. Chamber executives sat down and went through the enormous barrel of entries that we received, and we stopped at about 1,030 to reach a statistical average sample, which showed over $4 million coming into the local economy in 11 weeks. And in postcodes right across the eastern seaboard, but most importantly in our local community, which was amazing to see, and I think we're quite blessed living in Gunnedah. So it far exceeded our own expectations, and I commend the report to you, and I'm open for any questions later. We've got quite a lot to get through tonight, so thank you.
Thank you, Mr. MacArthur. So now I'll open to elected members. Should you have a question?
Yes, I do. Yes, is there anything you did different? Is there some glaring image of the building, something like the
I think there's always room for improvement. I'd be happy to take ideas. This is fair, will be a bit of a challenge, and we'll wait to see what it's going to look like if we get a similar response. Hopefully we can do it better. Anything that we do differently? Perhaps run it for a bit longer. 11 weeks, which is a long period of time, and many businesses participating. Gunnedah's a really good place to be, whether it's to eat or shop or catch up with friends. So, but open to all and any ideas.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. McCarthy, I'm a great supporter of the Chamber of Commerce, and this is a wonderful campaign. I have been involved in these in the past. Having the amount of money generated by those who participated in the competition, it's probably hard to work out what they would have spent in Gunnedah compared to the additional, because we can't really say that the Shop Local campaign, all those tickets were new spends, rather that they participated in the promotion. It'd be interesting to see if we could actually at some stage find out how having a competition such as this raised the amount of, and I think it did, I'm quite confident that it did stop people going elsewhere, but I think the whole 4 million probably can't all be attributed to the competition. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I think that that's a fair point, because we don't have a baseline. I mean, perhaps we could talk about that offline to learn out what history on past campaigns contributed, what amount. Yes, were people going to shop for Christmas? Absolutely. Were they going to spend that amount as an average? Maybe not. The fact that there were weekly prizes and a car definitely helped, I'd suggest to you, and the number of postcodes outside of the Gunnedah area as well coming to shop here. The advertising campaign we ran. How do we measure that? I'm not entirely sure. Perhaps we could include a question about who shopped at Gunnedah previously or something like that. So that's something to look into.
The great outcomes for that.
Thank you. We've got a great community. Can't do it alone.
Any further questions, councillors? I'll just finish quickly with a statement myself. It was great to actually see the quality of this report come back to council. Quite often council support many organisations in our community, and at times I scratch my head and wonder, was that a good investment? So to get the quality of a report that has the level of statistics in here that talks about the amount of entries, that talks about the revenue that was generated based on the investment by this organisation, great outcomes, much greater than I expected that it would, the interest it would generate. And as the report goes into the detail about those postcodes too, of where some of these entries have come from, I would have to doubt if so much of that money might have come from other areas outside of the Gunnedah Shire if we weren't out there with council and partnership with the Chamber of Commerce on this particular project, went out there banging the drum about come shop in Gunnedah. So not just the actual program itself, but I certainly appreciate the reporting to come back to council. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. McCarthy. So you may leave or stay for the complete meeting. It's entirely up to you. I will make that statement to all of our presenters. There's no requirement that you stay for the whole council meeting or just do your item on the agenda. You are able to stay, but you're not required to. So if you would like to leave after you've made the presentation, completely understand. So next on our list is Mr. Bob Ironmonger. If I could ask you to come forward. Mr. Ironmonger is speaking in relation to item 11.2, Mr. Director of Planning and Environmental Services report, endorsement of submission to the State Significant Development 8530563 Gunnedah Waste Facility. Mr. Ironmonger, as you've heard, 5 minutes, and if I could ask you to state, I guess, your position in relation to the item or the recommendation from the officer before you start, and I'll ask the same of all of those presenting if they're in favour or against the position. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, councillors, my name is Robert Ironmonger, and I'm here before council today in regard to council's response to the Department of Planning concerning the proposed waste facility at 16 Common Road. I do so as a private citizen, the ratepayer and close neighbour to the proposed development. Council's response is evidenced on the Department of Planning website, does not adequately address the following issues. flooding. The Costa Lot subdivision, upon which the development is situated, was constructed on a natural watercourse. And that watercourse was diverted, and subsequently, my graphic doesn't appear to have gone forward. The graphic evidence was provided, or is presented, I'm sorry, to indicate that the subdivision environments are subject to inundation from stormwater emanating from the old abattoir site flowing around the site of the proposed waste facility. Additionally, historical major flood data indicates the potential for major flood levels from the Namoi River to be very close to the location of the proposed development. Runoff from the site of the proposed development impacts neighbouring properties to the west and the north. Unfortunately, Council's submission does not adequately address this issue in terms of possible discharge of contaminants during high rainfall and flooding events. It's noted from Council's submission, the developer should provide on-site detention tanks to capture roof water from the large sheds intended to be constructed. The submission doesn't address concerns that heavy rainfall on hard stand areas may allow contaminated water from the site escaping into the dormant water bodies. Given the size of the shed proposed, those detention tanks would be massive. Surrounding residences, Council's submission does not clearly enunciate that there are 12 occupied residences within 500 metres of the proposed development. A number of these residences are less than 300 metres distant. There is no express concern in Council's submission regarding the potential impact or loss of amenity to the occupants of the residences concerned if the proposed development is approved. Consultation. There has been a clear lack of proper consultation with affected residences and by the developer or council. This fact was not addressed in Council's submission, which may have been appropriate. We realise Council is not the approving body in this case, but we've been told there's no obligation on Council to consult with affected parties. That said, Council should have exercised duty of care and consulted with affected residents on what was being proposed. Council's submission does not clearly address the origin and types of waste streams to be accepted and processed in the proposed facility. Information provided in the EIS is very scanty. However, anecdotal evidence says the waste may come from Sydney, also Queensland, where the developer owns a number of waste services. Truck movements. Council submission does not address the impact of routing of a large number of additional truck movements to and from the development. I note Council submission references a waste disposal facility as per VA 2020-054. This facility is at Mary's Mount and will generate many additional truck journeys. As a matter of course, I know there are already a large number of loaded truck movements from the existing enterprise at 16 Commons Road. In that regard, there are concerns as to the nature of waste streams to be transported to Mary's Mount, yet Council's submission doesn't address it. Noise and vibration. Council submission references noise impacts on properties to the east of the proposed development. It doesn't adequately address the issue of noise and vibration upon properties to the west and north of the location, which may be subjected to the same issues. I note from drawings provided in the EIS, the existing fuel facility at 16 Torrens Road is to be relocated. The EIS is silent as to where this may be. Council submission has not addressed this factor, and it would be reasonably expected the issue should have been addressed. I am aware, there's anecdotal evidence suggested that the site across the road from the development may be developed as a truck parking area area and fuel storage. This would surely be subject to a development application, subject to stringent conditions in terms of contamination or fuel spills. Fire suppression. Although the exact nature of waste streams is unclear, it is apparent from the EIS that some combustible materials may be processed and stored on the site, including plastic, timber, used oil filters, tyres, and lithium batteries. The council submission and the EIS does not address the issue of any required on-site fire suppression systems. Dust. I note comments regarding dust and air quality in council submission. Unfortunately, it doesn't clearly identify any concern that dust raised during unloading those external storage components. I thank you for the opportunity to address council, and I and our near neighbours are open to further discussion with council regarding the proposed development. It goes without saying that open and honest consultation with residents affected by this development should have heard and certainly is needed in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ironmonger. I'll now open the floor for any elected members who'd like clarification or ask a question.
I'll ask one question. Just one question, Mr. Ironmonger. You've raised a number of issues there. I presume that most of those issues have been addressed by your own submission, at least even if you maintain that the council didn't address them.
Just my issue was that they did not. I have, as you or elected members would be aware, I have written to councillors in regard to this, also to council, and many of those issues I have raised, but I was speaking to the actual response by council to the Department of Planning.
Are there any further questions? No? Well, thank you, Mr. Ironmonger.
Thank you.
I'll now call on Ms. Rankin to come forward, please. Ms. Rankin will be speaking on the same item, which is in relation to the development application for the Gunnedah Waste Facility.
Mr. Chairperson, councillors and guests, my name is Deanne Rankin and my home is Portland, 10255 Kinarroy Highway, Gunnedah. I've lived in my home since moving to Gunnedah in 1996. I've raised my family here, my husband's an ambulance officer in this town, and I'm currently a community nurse. I've been here working since 1998 in that position. Today I speak about the proposed Gunnedah Waste Facility and today's discussion around the endorsement by council submission to the proposed development. We're all aware that this DA is deemed a state significant development, and as such local council has been able to make submissions like all interested parties. But on behalf of the residents, a very close group of residents that are going to be mostly affected by this development, I wish to voice our concerns about the lack of community consultation by the McKellar family group of companies, and that includes Next, Gunnedah Quarry Products, and the Bosch Bins Group that's located in Queensland. Also, with Gunnedah Council, I do not believe the issue of lack of community consultation has been raised by council in your submission to the New South Wales Planning and Industry Environment. To the best of my knowledge, council has known about the Gunnedah Waste Facility and Marys Mount landfill proposal since as far back as 2019. However, we, the people that will be most affected, found out about it in late December. The letter was dated the 16th. We get mail 3 times a week, so some days after that come from Sydney, and one neighbour as late as mid-January. So we had extraordinary little time to read and understand the EIS and consult our neighbours and community or seek further information pertaining to this development. We are finding out that very few of our local community know about this development, and those that have been informed are incredulous that such a development could get to the stage that it's at without proper, meaningful, factual community consultation. We as a community are extremely disappointed and angry that these development applications have been allowed to quietly progress towards approval without our valuable input. We, the neighbours who share boundary fences and live within close proximity, were never contacted by the proponents until we initiated the contact. So, and we don't we have a right to say about what goes on in our own backyards? And when we consulted council website, one of the very things that really stood out to me is community consultation will include asking the community for feedback on council policies, service delivery performance, or involving the community in the progress or review of specific project developments. However, today on a local level, we've not been afforded this opportunity. The proponent only met with us after we initiated contact, and the meeting was less than helpful. It actually raised more questions than answers, and as a group, we felt our very real concerns were largely ignored. There were several issues raised with the General Manager, and he started to get back to us. To my knowledge, that still hasn't happened. The General Manager also stated that a brochure was placed in our mailboxes in September, and we were told that brochure wasn't addressed to us, the homeowner, or by our names. There were no other attempts to make contact with us. They openly admitted that, and many of the residents have not, to this day, received that brochure. One neighbour has a locked mailbox. There's only one key, and there was no brochure in that mailbox either. So my big question is, how is this meaningful consultation with the community? How does this type of total disregard for the neighbour foster good relationships and open dialogue? No wonder 182 of their EIS indicates that there's been no objections received today. No one will back this to object. We, the neighbours, have been totally disregarded. I don't know how this can happen. We have a legal right to live in our small rural lots. However, we haven't rated a mention. Whitehaven Coal rates a mention. We reside right beside Whitehaven Coal. We didn't rate a mention. So does council support ratepayers and community members in calling for the developer to be more open, transparent and more engaging with the community? The EIS also indicates that they'll be treating approximately 250,000 tonnes of waste per year. Most of this will be generated outside our region. However, the EIS does not indicate where this recycled content or waste will eventually end up. The EIS does continually refer to the Mayor's Macquarie landfill proposal. However, to the best of my knowledge, this proposal has not been approved, or does the developer know more than the community and council? Would it be a fair assumption to make that these developments go hand in hand? And this is where perhaps the Torrens Road waste will end up. What incentive, if any, is there to recycle, reuse if a landfill is really close by? Does this not send alarm bells ringing for our community and indeed council that this rural regional town will be a dumping ground for garbage not wanted in other towns and cities and states? I do understand the short-term financial gains a development like this will bring to the community, but I also know the financial and environmental burden it may cause. The new Koala Park will purportedly cost Gunnedah Council some hundreds of thousands of dollars to clean up the contaminated waste from years ago. Do we want to repeat the situation? Do we want our kids and grandkids to be paying similar bills? The DA states that the commercial industrial waste will be accepted. Do we want to be a dumping ground for waste from the coal and energy related developments as reported on page 65 of their EIS? How is it possible, too, that so much asbestos, lithium batteries, contaminated soil and other waste products will be transported to and from and processed in or stored on the site so close to rural residential homes? This development has the potential to inflict far-reaching adverse effects on this community now and into the future. At risk is our environment, health, agricultural industry, touristic industry and our way of life and current lifestyle. The proposed site is within town limits, while council's very own waste facility is approximately 2 kilometres further out of town. How can that site even be considered? Other businesses and homes within that vicinity in the industrial area will also be affected, and most of them didn't know a lot about this either. The environmental impact statement has been constructed over a long period of time. However, Gunnedah Council's submissions back to New South Wales Planning demonstrates some of the many inconsistencies that litter this EIS. How can we be confident that these issues are going to be rectified and any of our concerns taken seriously? An issue that has previously been raised as far back as 2017 with this industrial lot is that landscaping and a vegetation buffer zone should have been down the western side and the eastern side. To date, the only vegetation buffer zone that's there is around the house, the residents of that lot. So that's never been addressed. Do we want our region that is named one of Australia's most productive agricultural areas and the koala capital of the world to be turned into a waste dump for Australia? Look into the future, do we support tourism, agriculture, koala population? This could all easily be derailed and decrease our value as a rural community. We, the neighbours of the proposed development, are genuinely concerned about our homes from loss of amenity. It will inflict emotional and financial stress and distress on our families. There's a very real concern the impact of this may have on the environment and the negative impact on our town. Council's been working very hard and spending money to increase tourist numbers and making our region attractive in a very competitive tourism market. But will tourists want to come if our lovely town has a waste management facility with rubbish and everything lying everywhere? And in closing, we would like to know if council and councillors support this development, given that there has been no meaningful consultation whatsoever. We know councils with very robust stand against hunting New England Health on the lack of community consultation, and rightly so. And this was demonstrated in the Gunnedah Times on the 11th of February. We understand that council's angst around this very issue, and we are hoping that Gunnedah Council may be in the position to foster consultation between the proponent and those who will be most affected on a daily basis, should this application be successful. Thank you. Sorry about the motion.
Thank you, Ms. Rankin. I'll now call for recommenders. Are there any questions or clarifications required?
One question, but two parts. Mr. Lincoln, I understand it's an emotional issue for you. Just two things. One of the things that you raised is to those who deal with these matters a fair bit, that it's the processes laid down by the state government with regard to how these matters are dealt with in the approval process. Have you raised this issue with the local member, for example, about how you object to not the, how the system's run by the state government? The second part of the question is, have you read our submission and have you any comments on it?
Yeah.
Really comprehensive submission.
It is a very comprehensive submission, and the one probably from council, the big one was the lack of community consultation, but around the actual development. It wasn't on display. It was very difficult to get information, and it was very easy to get information around the process from Wade and Andrew and Caitlin down at New South Wales Planning, but it was very difficult to get the information out there to the community members. Half of Gunnedah don't know about it. I'll go so far as to say 3/4 of Gunnedah don't know about it. They assumed it was council's waste because the name is so very close to Gunnedah Council waste. So they assumed it was something council, and it wasn't. The other thing I have, it has been raised to various members of New South Wales to say around developments like this that there really needs to be a much more open and more community consultation, and people need to be told not just to go and read a 700-page document that they've never come across before in their life. I think we've all done pretty bad.
Is there any councillor?
Through Mr. Minister, a quick question. You have made your own submission to the Department of Planning on this topic and voiced the opinions we've heard this evening. Thank you.
Definitely. We've got 89 objections.
Thank you. Excellent.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions or comments? No? Thank you, Ms. Rankin. Appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you.
I now call on Mr. Finlay to come forward with this. Also speaking in relation to item 11.2, which is the Gunnedah Waste Facility development.
I'm here in relation to the endorsement of submission and my waste facility. I don't believe that the council's submission goes far enough. I have also made my own submission in regards to the DA. My name is Luke Finlay. I'm here on behalf of me and my wife and our 4 children. We have 4 young children and we share a fence with the proposed development. There's no buffer between our small block and the proposed development. I was, and you'll have to forgive me if I go over a couple of points that have already been raised here this afternoon. Family members notified me of the proposed development 10 days prior to the closing of submissions for the DA. 10 days before the closing of submissions, my brother told me about what was going to happen. That was the end of January. As you're well aware, the EIS is a risk assessment. It's a hazard analysis. It's supposed to take in all the considerations for potential adverse outcomes for the environment and stakeholders. I actually think it refuses to acknowledge our existence, those of us living on residential blocks surrounding that proposed development. In the executive summary on page 8, it states that the nearest residential zoned area is 1.15 kilometres from the site. There's no mention of the rural residential blocks whatsoever. On page 16, under the suitability of the site is surrounded by other compatible developments and land uses. Moreover, it is adequately separated from sensitive receivers to enable potentially adverse environmental impacts, air and noise, to be adequately managed and mitigated. They obviously don't consider a family with 4 young children to be sensitive receivers. Where we share a fence, I just think throughout that whole document that they have not gone far enough in acknowledging us as landowners and as people who live in that area. I've been a health and safety manager in the past, and the risk assessment needs to be honest and thorough. And if you're denying the existence of those that are going to be most affected by that development, then when it comes to putting in controls or mitigate in order to mitigate those adverse effects, then how can we possibly expect to receive protection from that if we haven't been properly addressed? I don't believe that council submission goes far enough to address that fact that we have been totally left out of that. On numerous occasions, they talk of the industrial blocks and the further industrial areas surrounding it, but they don't even bring up the fact my place is just a little white square on a map, and at no point is rural residential people addressed. Another point that I didn't think was made clearly enough in council submission was ongoing monitoring measures in place. Should it actually be approved in operation, there's really nothing in the IS that lists what we would consider as adequate ongoing monitoring procedures. Given our close proximity, many occasions I stood on the house and watched the dust from McKellar's industrial sites flow across the entirety of our block. The water from those blocks currently runs across the front of my house. It actually runs through my front yard literally within 10 feet of my front porch. The water off those blocks, in a meeting with the developer, he's told us that those blocks are designed to run to the curb. So I don't know how that's been left out. And I have to paraphrase, in a meeting with him, he basically said that he would consider us to be diligent officers in that regard. So in other words, he's put the onus back on us as landholders. And again, I think there needs to be more emphasis put on the fact that there really are no ongoing monitoring measures in place. I'm aware that the approval for this development lies with the State Department. My concern is when I see a development application that directly affects the health and well-being of my young family, with so many emissions, so much that wasn't said, then again, any efforts towards mitigation or control of any of those hazards for us as an affected group is ineffective. And I have to ask where state legislation and processes fail to protect us as local residents, what responsibility does council have to step in and protect us? Thank you.
I'll now call for elected members. If you have a question, Mr. Pillai. Thank you, councillor.
Again, have you put a submission to our member, local member?
Yes, I have.
And did you say it was only 10 days prior that you knew about that?
Yes.
So you didn't receive information in your mail?
I didn't receive information in the mailbox, no. I do find it, on that point, I found it, my parents live on Blackjack Road and they received information letter regarding it, but I also feel that without stating it exactly, I feel that there seems to be a number of us that live very close to that development, and there's too many of us that didn't receive anything, and I have to wonder why that is the case. It's not just one or two of us that didn't receive the notification. There's quite a few along that road in close proximity that received nothing. So,
Do you get your mail on mailbox?
beg your pardon?
Do you get your mail on mailbox?
Yes, we do on there. Yep.
Any further questions?
Yes, thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor, and look, thank you very much for that presentation, one of three so far. An area that concerns me a little bit, it's about the submissions. I presume that all people who are affected in that area have actually put in a submission to the planning authority. Would that be correct, as far as you're aware?
As far as I'm aware of.
Yeah, and there were a number that obviously council received a certain number of submissions as well. Some of them appeared to be just a running out copy of the original submission. And I don't know how much weight as far as the planning department is concerned that actually takes. A separate covering letter on top of that is fine, but I'm just a little bit concerned that the concerns that you have, being able to get in front of the commission and put your case personally, may be thwarted by the fact that there weren't enough individual submissions rather than a generic submission that was put in. I just raise that as a concern from our point of view. I just hope that I'm wrong, that there are enough there that you can be able to put your case directly to the planning.
Yeah, I'm aware of that I did also make an individual submission.
If I could just interject there, I'll just ask for clarification from our Director of Planning. I think he has some feedback on that very item.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Through you, yeah, we've received indications from the department that there were more than 50 unique submissions. So, irrespective of the number of form submissions, there was enough unique submissions to warrant it to be determined by the IPC, the Independent Planning Commission. So that's one out of that.
Thank you.
Paul, are there any further questions of Mr. Pillai? Thank you. I'll now call forward our next presenter, which is Mr. Hamlin. Mr. Hamlin will also be speaking on item 11.2 in relation to council's submission of the Gunnedah Waste Facility.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak before you here today. And what I have to say, the following comments are made without prejudice to any party. And I know the document that I presented to you to review already may seem a little bit abstract in its content at this point in time, but I think it's only reasonable to give the background to it, because I think it may be a process that may unfold and be applied to other parties who dare to speak against either of these developments and try and get it. So I'll do my best to explain my position. My name is Alan Handel. I represent my family who live on a property adjoining the proposed garbage dump site at Mary's Mount. It is a 4,000 acre farming and grazing property with extensive views of Mount Capitalata, Blue Plain and the Phillip Forest. After serious discussion with my solicitors, whom I have had to employ in an attempt to protect my family's interests, I've seen a need to analyse concerns with regard to the document here before you. This is being done with some trepidation,
in an attempt to protect my family from further pressure, as we see it, being imposed upon it by the McKellar Group. My family, along with others, received absolutely zero consultation on the Mary's Mount garbage dump proposal or any consideration of visual impacts, odour impacts, etc. Although these were clearly mandated by the EPA as areas needing comprehensive and meaningful address in a letter to the proponent dated the 26th of the 9th, 19. We were only alerted to the proposal at a very late stage by a council letter, approximately 3 weeks before the close of submissions on the subject. As soon as we received notice from council, I spoke by phone with the consultant who prepared the EIS. When I questioned that person as to why meaningful consultation had not been undertaken with potentially impacted stakeholders, especially adjoining ones that looked directly into the garbage dump site, he argued a slip of paper had been put in our letterbox sometime previous, and that was all he had to do. When I stated we had not received that piece of paper, he basically said, "That's your problem," and hung up. I then called a senior McKellar Group representative in an attempt to gain understanding of the proposal. That person informed me the person I had previously spoken with had very poor people skills. I don't agree with that. And stated the company representative would speak with us at our convenience and begin dialogue on the matter. We had to initiate that ourselves. That person was described to us as the general manager of the McKellar Group. A meeting was held between that person, my wife Donna, and myself at our home. That person apologised for the failure in the consultation process and, as a consequence, not allowing the unconcerns to be viewed in the EIS. The EIS suggests by omission that we had no concerns, which is entirely incorrect. He also agreed that investigation of the visual impacts relative to our property was entirely lacking in the EIS. He agreed there would be financial and visual impacts imposed upon us by the development should it proceed, and we immediately began discussing methods by which compensation to address these matters of concerns could be negotiated. The above matters are noted in our submission to council previous on the matter relative to the proposal and were not contested when the McKellar Group viewed that very submission. Unfortunately, as discussions evolved, the McKellar Group dismissed previous statements made by it. It did not argue those statements were not made, but merely walked away from the worst of using the same in negotiations. This has put my family in a most invidious position. To effectively pursue our rights, I voted the EPA to advise that if the proponent refuted statements made verbally or in written form, which effectively give work to what is basically an EIS contract, then the EIS could be argued as failing to meet its requirements under the Act. Documents held by Mr. Wade Hudson clearly explain my logic on this matter and can be accessed from him to give further explanation on what I'm talking about just here. It is my real concern that any stakeholder who tries to effectively pursue their rights as to compensation due to impacts imposed on them by legislation, should they proceed, could be potentially subjected to the same pressure tactics. My opinion is that this manoeuvre by the McKellar Group is entirely contrary to reasonable social conscience being shown by the developer what was conceded by it as an adversely impacted adjoining landowner, being ourselves. It could be argued, I believe, an action that is not only morally wrong, but one which should be viewed as a negative to obtaining a licence to conduct such developments. Should approval be given to these developments in the future, the addition, as was stated to me by the EPA, is not only allowable but advisable, is struck as a fundamental right of affected stakeholders to negotiate compensation for any adverse impacts or financial loss which may flow from such approval. I still argue the case primarily that the EIS is declared null and void until such time as the proponent declared that all statements made in support of it and contained within it are true, and that the EIS be comprehensive. To do otherwise is to basically, in my opinion, utilise a document for consent purposes in defiance of its fundamental requirement to be truthful, comprehensive,
and not be materially misleading by either omission or otherwise. Thank you very much for your attention and the opportunity to voice my concerns.
Thank you, Mr. Hamlin. I'll now ask elected members if you'd like any clarification or you'd like to ask a question of Mr. Hamlin.
Just a comment, I guess, Mr. Cameron. You mentioned at the beginning we were related to the Mary Court.
That's correct.
But we're talking about the one on Torrens Road, so what's the
Yeah,
connection?
well, I asked permission to speak at this forum and it was allowed, and I think it's only reasonable that every person potentially affected by this development could be subjected to the same tactics if they try to pursue their rights. I can't afford to employ a solicitor, but I'm had to. I can't afford to be taken to court because I'm trying to exercise my rights to speak to counsel, which, if you read the document, is directly told by their legal team not to do.
Yeah, I understand that. I was just trying to differentiate the waste that on Torrens Road and here is now one, because the sedition that we're putting is to do with the Torrens Road one.
Well, with respect, I think, Rick, in reality, and the documents that my solicitor had prepared on the matter, both developments are one and the same. They refer continually to each other as being not self-sufficient, but interlocutory to the extent that one cannot survive without the other. And it's my argument that both of the developments should be seen as one and go again to a resubmission process with a comprehensive EIS. Because it's all right for EPA, it's all right for council to ask questions behind the scenes, and we all appreciate them doing that to gain more information. But it's so scant and lacking in the EIS documentation that currently stand. But the people affected all around today's proposals don't get an opportunity to pass commentary on that. So it's a denial of natural justice to those people to even understand the parameters of what these projects are going to involve. It's just unrealistic to think a scant EIS can be prepared and then refuted by the proponent as having content in it that he says, no, that's not correct, which he directly said to me was the case with the proposal out there, and then use that as a document by which consent may be given. It's just totally unrealistic.
Are there any further questions, councillors? Thank you, Mr. Hamlin. Appreciate your time. Thank you. Thank you. I'll now call on our next presenter, and that's Mrs. Carol Ward. Come forward. Mrs. Ward will be speaking in relation to item 11.9 on our agenda, which is the Director of the Planning and Environmental Services report in relation to planning proposal on the E3 zoning amendments to our LEP. So, Mr. Ward, I'll just remind you that 5 minutes to go, and I'll have councillors if there's any clarification questions. Thank you.
Mayor Chaffey, councillors, council staff, ladies and gentlemen, I'm here representing the Rangarite Farmers Group. There's about 26 persons that are affected by the E3 zoning. And before I begin, I'm going to ask you to imagine if your homes all of a sudden were placed under a vegetative protection act, which meant you could not mow your lawns, you could not trim your trees, you could not put up a garden shed, you were not allowed to pull your weeds or remove any timber off your land. How do you think that would affect the value of your property? After a summer like we're just having with all this rain, what's the street appeal of your property to a prospective buyer? Now you think I'm being melodramatic, probably a little ridiculous, but there is approximately 52 things in the E3 zone that we cannot do now that we could do when we were in RU1. And these include things like putting up farm infrastructure. And even as the government is making grants available to drought-proof properties, we can't put up a silo or build a hay shed. If we abide by the letter of the law, we can't even offer courage on tree to feed hungry stock or to save them from the mistletoe that's currently killing. The mistletoe is a really bad issue. And if you don't think this has an impact, please refer to our neighbours, Tony and Viv Haynes. Prior to Christmas, Tony and Viv had an offer on their property. It was a good offer by somebody that was really keen to expand his sheep grazing operation. That was until he discovered what being in an E3 zone meant. The offer was withdrawn. It wasn't reduced. He walked away. He did not want it. There has been a second company look at Haynes' property for carbon offsets, and they walked away. I ask you to think back to the scenario I outlined in the beginning. These are not just our homes, these are our livelihoods. And they are our retirement and superannuation policies. We have several neighbours that are approaching that stage where farming is not going to be an option for a lot longer, and they are stuck because their properties at this point are unsafe. Without being allowed to manage vegetation, amend fences, or the build-up of feral animals such as pigs and goats, and soon to be deer, because they have been spotted not too far away, are already becoming a problem. And not to mention, after the rains we've had, the build-up of underground storage that is dramatically increasing our fire hazard in the area. All of these issues are having a significant negative impact, not just on our mental and financial well-being, but on our futures. We acknowledge that there has been an application by Shire to amend the LEP for the E3 zone. But after over 2 years, almost 3 years of campaigns and discussions with state departments in regard to this, we have absolutely zero faith that any significant changes will be made that will correct this gross injustice. For 5 years now, we have tried every avenue we know of to revise the E3 zone, and this is our final avenue to work with council to effect change. So we urge you, please, to consider this motion to rezone the privately owned E3 zone back to AD1 and to vote in favour of this proposal. As a sideline, my husband and I have a GDA approved to build our home on our property. It's never going to happen under E3. The property is not worth the capital investment to build our home. So we are currently commuting approximately 700 to 800 kilometres a week from the house in town to the farm to work because we can't live out there. So we urge you, please, to vote in favour of this proposal. We would also urge council to provide a delegation, if this resolution goes through, to accompany Kevin Anderson to see the Minister, as Kevin has promised us to go to the Minister with a resolution from the council and have this addressed directly. We commit to send the same representation from our group, our own cost, to have this Minister listen to our side of the story. So yes, we thank you for your time, we thank you for your consideration, and we just ask that you would consider in favour of this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Ward. Councillors, I'll now afford an opportunity if you have a question or you'd like clarification on statements.
Just,
Councillor Smoke, can I ask you to turn your microphone on, please?
sorry, Mr. Mayor, I'm sitting there being comfortable. Carol, carbon offsets, I understood that if you, I mean, this is quite separate from what we're talking about, I guess, in a sense. The carbon offsets, if your property was legislated under the carbon offsets, I understood that it was your responsibility to control feral animals. And,
We're not on carbon offset.
No, but I was thinking about talking about.
I know, the proposed line for Mr. Holmes' property, for Tony Bruce's property, was looking for carbon offset, but because the makeup of timber on that property, it did not fit their requirements, and because they can't manage that vegetation by clearing and promoting other vegetation that is worthwhile, they didn't want it.
I understand, thank you.
Are there any further questions? Councillor O'Keefe?
Comment on that, it's quite ludicrous, isn't it, that arbitrary rule from Sydney, in theory, in name of protecting the environment, expressly forbids or prohibits something as worthwhile as carbon offsets or an attempt to help the environment in that way. Look, my question or comment, it's really a comment to thank you and your community group's resilience through this process. It's something that's been going on since before this council was elected almost 5 years ago, and I can't do anything but thank you for the resilience and the efforts to get us to the stage where we are now and can hopefully right this past wrong.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions, councillors? Thank you, Mrs. Moore. We appreciate your time. Next, I'd like to call Ms. Rhonda Smith forward, please. Ms. Smith will be talking in relation to item 12.1, Director of Infrastructure Services report, and that's in relation to the Gunnedah Basketball Association lease. And just a friendly reminder, Ms. Smith, you have 5 minutes.
I'm here to, I'm Rhonda Smith from Gunnedah Basketball, and I'm here against the 5-year lease that's been offered for our sport. Legal advice given for a 10-year lease with an option of 10 more years in a transitional period. As per your business paper, page 279, subclause 72D, Crown Management Regulation 2018. A question asked to an independent or legal representative by council. Is a 10-year agreement with an option of 10 years permissible under the current transitional arrangements? It is our understanding that the agreement should be treated as a whole new negotiation due to it lapsing in 2015 and no agreement in place since then. And the legal advice from the independent legal person, if the licence is able to be issued under subclause 72D of the Crown Land Management Regulation of 2018, it can be issued for a period not exceeding the maximum term. I will repeat, it can be issued for a period not exceeding the maximum term, the maximum term being 21 years. It should be pointed out that the new Act does not come into place until July 2021, which states we can have no longer than a 5-year lease. Gunnedah Basketball has always had a good working relationship with council during the 20-year licence agreement that we've had from 1995 to 2015. So it's hard to comprehend why the same lease would not be considered now. Our association has always undertaken the maintenance and kept the building, which is probably worth over $3 million today. It is always kept in sound functioning condition without asking council to contribute. We should also remember how many adults, children ranging from 5 to 60 years, disabled children and adults that have been through the stadium, either as a player, referee, committee person, volunteer over the years. This would possibly include some of your own family members. We are very proud that we have provided this enjoyable, safe environment for people to train and play the sport of basketball. We also find that the last question, excuse me, printed on, page 280, a little disturbing. Gunnedah Basketball did not at any time refuse to sign the lease. While it is easy to point the finger of blame elsewhere, we would like to remind you that during that period, at no time did council staff follow the lease up, ensure that it was signed in their role as Crown Land Managers. I'm sure if it had been followed up by council, it would have been signed and we would not be in this situation. Question is, why don't council officers want to give us a long lease? Why is it a big deal when we have already had a 20-year lease with no problems? Had a lease been finalised in 2015, we would now be in a 6 years of a 20-year lease. We expect the maximum lease that we are entitled to and have probably paid the highest construction costs in building our stadium on the showground Crown Reserve in comparison to any other site utilising the showground. And we paid for a third of the construction of the poultry shed in order to gain the site for our stadium. So we expect the longest term possible, a 20-year licence period as we had previously. We want to concentrate on the development of our sport involving basketballers, young and old, as we have done for the past 25 years, rather than be diverted by the negotiation of a new lease every 5 years. I'm sure any of you councillors can vouch for the fact that we have always been good community-minded people, allowing the use of the stadium where possible, including events such as IMAX, the CNDA rally, bird shows, Gunnedah shows, school sport, whilst at the same time recognising that we have to protect our floor, which we spend $10,000 to $12,000 every 3 years to maintain. We are asking that the lease drawn up and not signed in 2019 be redrawn to include the annual fee. I should also point out that the Crown Lands Department were happy to sign off on the original lease, indicating that they had no concerns at that time. We look forward to council supporting our request for a 20-year lease period. Thank you for the opportunity to make this presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. I'll now open the floor for elected members. If you have any questions or clarifications, Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you, Honour, thanks for coming to talk with us this evening. Couple of questions. I might start with the easiest one I have is, how many members, I don't mind if it's playing members or non-playing members or both, does the Basketball Association have at the moment?
We probably have between 300 and 400 kids and adults.
Okay, excellent, thank you, that's great. Next question is, are you aware or have you has it been explained to you that the reason the council is seeking to offer a 5 + 5 year lease is because if we offer a lease term longer than 5 years, we believe we would have to advertise the lease and seek an open or competitive tender process for an organisation to lease the facility off Crown Lands.
That doesn't have to be done because we're still under the old Act. We've got till the end of June to follow the old regulations, so we don't have to advertise. And I think it says also in that letter from your legal representative to say that we don't have to advertise unless you want to advertise. So I guess that comes back to council.
Councillors, are there any further questions or comments? Councillor?
One question to you, Mr Chairman. Mr Smith, if you tell us, were you involved when the original building was constructed and lease negotiated, and what role do you now play in the organisation?
I was one of the original members that got the basketball stadium up and running. We worked hard and long to get the land to start off with and then get grants and all the money together to build the stadium. There was a heap of us that did that, and as I said, we worked hard to get the site open. We had to come to some arrangement with the poultry club to move their shed up the back so we could put our basketball court on there. After it was up and running and I'd had a few years in there, I dropped out. It was only last year that I went to run an AGM and they couldn't get a secretary, so I more or less put my hand up as you do. So I've only come into it again the last 12 months. But the first thing I did do was ask about the lease. And I have been following it through. And I'm very passionate about the basketball stadium because I know how much work we have done to get it there and how many kids play there. And it's a good facility.
Any further questions before I go to Councillor O'Keefe, who's spoken once already? councillors? I'll allow one further question, councillor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, through you. My apologies, I forgot an important question. And I'll front run it with an apology that I'm not asking the questions I already know the answers to, I'm asking questions I don't, I'm not following the line. Our information provided to us as councillors is that for the duration of the occupation of the facility, so previous lease agreements, right up to including the situation the association is now in, which is essentially a month-by-month continuation of a former lease, that the Basketball Association's not once in its history actually paid the licence fee associated with the lease of the Crown lands. Are you aware of that, and or do you dispute that information has been provided?
No, the licence fees I don't think we've ever paid these, the fees. I think that was actually, I think we took it to council, I think it was written back, that we didn't have to pay the fees. But as I said before, we're happy to pay the fees now. But can I also add there, I know that you know the Lower Griffiths Gymnastics Centre doesn't pay fees either, because I've had to talk to Debbie and they don't pay fees for the Crown Land.
Thank you, Ms Smith. We appreciate your time. Next, I'll call Ms Fairbairn to come forward, and it's also in relation to item 12.1, which is the Director of Environment Infrastructure Services report in relation to the Basketball Association lease.
Councillors, thank you for the opportunity to address you. As you no doubt, I'm an oldie too, very passionate about basketball. I was a keen basketball player and a coach, and encouraged our four girls to play basketball. They were representing players for this school, Gunnedah Basketball and Northwest in the 1980s and 1990s, before the three of them pursued their careers. And like most volunteers, parents, I felt it important to support the sport that our family was involved in, and consequently I joined the committee in the 1980s and continued in that role into the 90s. Having also kicked off junior, or as we call it then, mini ball in 1976, and this junior competition is still continuing on. This was the period where we undertook a lot of fundraising, as Ron said, and planned for the construction of the stadium, which we finally achieved in 1995. My daughter Sharon had replaced me on the committee right at that time. I returned to the committee at a later time. We have worked hard since 1995 in order to maintain the building and continue the recruitment, training of teams and conduct competitions that have been required over the last 25 years. And it has not always been easy, as most of you will realise in running voluntary organisations, as young committee people especially, are very hard to find and put their hands up. A 20-year licence agreement gives us surety that our $3 million asset remains ours for as long as possible, and allows us to concentrate on our main aim, playing and fostering the sport of basketball. I would hope that Council continues to recognise our history of commitment by providing a 20-year licence agreement for the future generation of players and coach. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Ms Byrne. Just before you go, I'll open the floor for any questions that an elected member may have. No questions? Thank you. Next, our ninth presentation we'll have from Mr. Richard McLean, and he'll be presenting in relation to item 13.3, the Chief Financial Officer's report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ladies and gentlemen, I support and vote in favour of 13.3, but also like to share some new information, research-based information, and the suggestion to the council that I may wish to consider passing that resolution with amendment or some qualification. And the new information relates to, if we have the next slide please, some research which I won't go into detail because of time, but some research over an extensive period of time about the effectiveness of legal action and rates recovery processes in New South Wales councils. The latest one looking at the efficacy of compassionate engagement prior to legal action and its impact on reducing the need for legal action. Could I have the next slide, please? This data here shows the group that Gunnedah Shire is in. On the left-hand axis there, those 2, 4, 6, 8 the percentages of rates outstanding at the end of the year. These are all the councils in the group in New South Wales. The green line tracking from high on the left down to low and climbing very slightly on the right is Gunnedah. The black dotted line is the average of the group, and the red dotted line is the ORG's benchmark maximum. Go to the next slide, please. This takes away all the noise and just shows Gunnedah Shire compared to the black line again, which is the average of this group, so your peers, and the red line, which is the ORG threshold. If we just go back just for one moment, please. In fact, back 2 slides just very quickly. Go back if that's possible, please. The one thing you'll notice as a trend is that in 2020, many of the rates outstanding percentages are going up again. And the reasons for that has been a combination of bushfires, drought, and the pandemic. Different councils, different shires have been affected differently by different things, but the drought has been the most universal impact on the larger group of events. And now forward, that one, that's it, thank you. What this shows is that the council's management has done a particularly good job with a difficult management function to be that far below the average of your peers and to be consistently low, although you see it is climbing a little. The 2020 figures to the 30th of June last year, so since then, as there's been an embargo on debt recovery, it may have climbed a little further, but obviously that information will come out at the 30th of June. But there's a little bit of an incline, so the number of people owing rates, or the amount that ratepayers are owing, has been increasing in this shire as it has been in other shires. Next slide, please. This shows the amount of money spent on legal fees, so suing ratepayers. This is council suing the ratepayers to collect the rates. The grey block in the middle with an outline is the average of the group. Gunnedah's in green again, it's second to right, so just this is the last 4 years data. So this is a combination of 4 years to the 30th of June last year. Gunnedah's second to largest, second to highest on charging the legal fees to the ratepayers that are struggling to pay. If you take away the 2 outliers, on the very left is Muswellbrook. They've got 47.7% of their rates come from some mines, and they're all paid, so half their rates get paid pretty much up front. And if you take away Moree on the other side, the outliers, then the Gunnedah, instead of being about double the average, tends out to be about 3 times the average. And so there's quite a significant cost to ratepayers, but this is the way rates recovery has been done for about 80 years. Basically, if you're having trouble paying your rates, you get sued. Go to the next slide, please. And so as a result of all that research, we've identified a predictable problem, and that is that just recommencing the same old way of doing it may mean that more ratepayers are sued, because after that 12-month embargo, rates outstanding levels are climbing. So more people have got more debt, more people will get sued. And suing now, as that bottom line says, probably isn't the most compassionate or practical strategy. Suing, as we said in our prayer, the darkened lives of people worry about and fear. When people are worried about their money and are in difficulty, they don't tend to answer when council tries to contact them. They don't tend to respond to letters or pick up the phone and ring up and say, I'm in trouble. So there's probably a better thing to do before we go back to suing people. Next slide, please. I'm going very fast because of the time. Yeah. You want me to go slow?
No, you'll have to continue to go fast.
Nearly finished, couple of go. So the new way that now 10 councils, including 5 large rural councils like Gunnedah have adopted, is that there is a compassionate visit to ratepayers before they're sued. There's a letter giving them the choice to opt out of the visit, and essentially the purpose of the visit, everybody who can pay does pay, Ratepayers don't develop unmanageable debt levels. Council minimises the amount of suing and the workload for council to recover the money, and council is demonstratively supportive to its community. Next slide, please. This is a chart that we use. We use very positive ways of doing it with this new approach. So you are here, let's make a plan to stay here. And this sort of exposes ratepayers so they understand there's greater transparency in what the process is. And this is the most negative thing we show them. The more positive things are influence techniques that are compassionate and rational, and people are always grateful when we finish. Next slide, please. Nearly finished. So on the left is what council does, the billing process and things. On the right is debt collection, and this is the new process in the middle, which involves writing to people and then calling them and then going visit them. And giving them a reminder. And I think last slide, one more slide or two more slides. Just looking at the costs, the first two stages of legal action are on the left in the orange. That's a statement of claim, which is served. Summons, if you like, which is served and then judgment. And then there's early stage intervention service, which, as you can see, is substantially lower. So the people who are struggling to pay their rates don't have the added burden of a huge amount of legal costs. And I think, is there one more slide, or is there, oh yes, sustainability. So it's not just sustainable for the individual ratepayer and their family, but it means the council can collect its rates more easily at lower costs. The ratepayer, it's better for the ratepayer, and it helps financially struggling families avoid the impact of high legal costs. So that ends the presentation, and if I could just say, respectfully request that council considers adopting a new approach, or looking at this new approach before it serves people, or even if it doesn't want to do that, if it considers adopting this just as a 6-week program to get back to normal debt recovery and to help everybody who's got themselves into a bit of trouble get back up to date again. The thing about legal action is everybody makes a payment arrangement pretty much when they're sued. They don't suddenly find the money, but now they've got to pay the legal costs. So if we can get them to make a payment arrangement without the legal costs, it makes a lot of sense and it's good for everybody.
Thank you, Mr. McLean. Any councillors, any questions, any comments? No? Thank you for your time, Mr. McLean. Thank you. We'll move on now. And next, I'll call Ms. Rebecca Ryan to come forward. And Ms. Ryan will be talking in relation to item 16.1, which is a notice of motion in relation to the displaced playground.
I've always been told to slow down when speaking, but I won't do that. I won't hear that advice tonight. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to Council today in relation to item 16, the notice of motion that Council install 3 additional pool-style gates with child-proof latches as the 3 entrances to Libby's Place Playground in order to improve child security during the opening hours. Funding to be provided from the 2021 Park Furniture Replacement Fund and the General Fund, and I'm speaking in favour of that. I'd like to begin by saying we have a fabulous, well-used park that has been delivered in large part due to the effort of council staff and councillors who championed this across 2 local government periods and secured the funding and directed their energy to deliver this project. It's a great park, but I think it could be greater. It's probably not proper English. But anyway, especially for families with young children or children who may be inclined to run. When Ashley Bender started petitioning for an exclusive playground, she discovered the Touch by Olivia Foundation and the Libby's Playground model as a play space that would take the stress out of going to the park for her family. And one of the elements that would do that was the fence. There are 4 characteristics of the Libby's Place Playground, and number 2 is security and safety. Totally fenced, so parents have peace of mind as to the location of their children, shaded for protection from the elements. Very soon after the playground opened, I heard some comments about the fence being open to Conaglee Street. There'd been some time and space between my active involvement in the working party stages and the final build, and so I asked council staff about the decision and was told that there was a concern the park would be looked closed to people. I think that issue of it looking closed could be addressed by other ways, by signage, flags, some other things. I was concerned that the fence was more about keeping people out after hours and limiting damage than protecting children. The necessity for the fence at that park was always about protecting children. In early tours of other Libby Place parks, we'd seen the face treated in many different ways and not exclusively as a security style fence. In fact, in Dubbo, it was much lower and blended into the environment. I'm out of the trenches, as some parents refer to those years, when you have 3 children under 4, and some remarkable feat of nature, you seem to forget what that can be like, and how any simple trip or outing can be immensely stressful. So I did put a call out to social media. I didn't want that to be an attack or a platform for trolls or to inflame the issue. So I just made a post on Gunnedah Mums, and I asked people to contact me direct with their comments, and I actually asked the administrators of that site to turn off commenting so that people couldn't comment. That page moved very quickly, but I immediately had some responses. I had 12 people message me direct. I had, thumbs up and little love hearts and that sort of thing. There was one message in support of the existing situation, and I've included that in the support documentation. But the other messages were overwhelming in support of this motion and relating their experiences. I've removed the names from most people. I did ask a couple if they were comfortable to be quoted. All the other people are real people, they're residents, and they're either current or past users of the park, and they love the park. You have a copy of those comments, but I'd just like to conclude by reading a few of those that highlight the issues that parents are having with the park without a child safety fence. I urge you to make this simple change to what's an amazing asset to our town, because it's a sliding door moment, it's a split second, it's a blink of the eyelids between the near misses that people have reported and a child dying. This is from Katie Abard. I strongly support the motion for childproof gates at Libby's Place Playground, and I'm happy for you to pass on my thoughts. The park is large enough when supervising multiple children and trying to interact and play with them, that you're physically unable to watch all 3 gates. I've personally guided quite a few parents' small children from exiting the open gates whilst they were busy with other children, and have seen my own kids wander back, and luckily through one of the other gates after exiting the one closest to where they were playing while I was unable to see them. I've also retrieved them numerous times from the toilet block and the footpath on Conaglee Street. My kids are aged 7, 5 and 3, and because of the open gates, I'm unable to take them to this park on my own. My 5-year-old has autism and ADHD and wanders off. He also has an obsession with a cafe across the road and has tried many times to get away and across the road quickly before I can stop him. I consider myself a highly vigilant parent through necessity. In combination with a 3-year-old with limited road safety and listening skills and who requires high-level supervision, we've had too many close calls at this park, and it's beyond me to capably supervise them with the gates opening onto the road. I'm aware of other families who've also had close calls near this very busy road, and I would feel terrible if something would happen and I hadn't spoken up. There's another comment. I go there regularly with my mother's group, and our kids are always trying to run out of the gates towards the road. It really is very stressful and makes us not really want to go there with toddlers. The gates would be a huge improvement to the park safety. And finally, there's a comment from Nikki Jerry, and she mentions that her child, I strongly support the gates, as my child ran out of the road there last year with another little boy, both 3-year-olds. They were chasing after a ball and had gone through the fence. I was right there with them. They were so incredibly fast. There were cars parked all along the road, so we were just lucky that there were no cars coming right at that time, as they wouldn't have seen them. I did email council and did receive a response that they could not put gates in. I didn't go any further because I didn't know how to take them further. Please, happy to pass that on. So that's just some quick feedback, and that was only from last night, but I just think, as one of the ones here, it's kind of a bit of a no-brainer.
Thank you, Ms. Ryan. I'll now open the floor for any questions or comments, councillors. Ms. Ryan?
Just one, Ms. Ryan. You're a relatively young mother. Have you had other people, grandparents age group, like myself, and that's feedback either in those ones or any conversations you may have had?
Oh, no, not specifically in that feedback, but certainly I have had some friends who take their grandchildren down there, same problem, because it's very impossible. You could be, you're nursing, you remember, you're nursing the 1-year-old, you're holding the hand of the 2-year-old, and the 6-year-old could be somewhere else. And I guess that's the concern, that it's just going to be a split second like that. I mean, my own experience was that I was in the town hall one day, and I was in that situation where I had the 6-year-old, and I had the baby, and then Julian went missing, and he was up the road in front of Leeds Castle looking at lorries. So across Conaglee Street at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. They're just near misses, and it's sliding doors and with the eyelid. And a park goes from being this beautiful asset to being the side of total tragedy.
Any further questions, councillors? No, thank you, Ms. Ryan. And our last presenter will be Ms. Rebecca Dryden, and also speaking on the item 16.1 notice of motion in relation to the disclosure. Thank you.
Much for the opportunity to speak. I'm not sure that I can actually add much more to Rebecca Ryan's presentation. Only that I'm a parent of a child with a disability and with similar, 3 kids under 3. And look, it's just a simple fix. And I would hate to see something that we're part of a working group to develop something which is such a fabulous asset for our community, and to see it up in the paper somewhere with somebody's child permanently disabled or killed, and somebody else involved in that. It's a simple fix. It's actually cheap. It's cheap. Really long-term. So that's it in a nutshell.
Thank you, Ms. Dryden. Any questions or comments, Ms. Dryden? No? Thank you. There may be one. Councillor Hazen?
The size of the fence is probably more prone to securing the equipment, although for some runners or some, depending on the age of the child, it could be secured a security fence, but without gates, that is a problem. Is that what you see?
Absolutely. The size of the fence, I've seen children as young as 4 scale a fence that height that's currently there, but honestly, just having some sort of physical barrier. We had a discussion about accessibility for somebody who has a physical disability and their capacity to be able to open a gate. And I like to think that we live in a community where somebody would actually be with that person, or somebody else around that they would actually help them go through that gate. I don't think the size of the fence is really a big deal. It's more for children. It's actually that perception of a barrier because their frontal lobe is not developed at that age. And many of us know that it takes way past 25 to get that frontal lobe working. So they just don't have the capacity, but to see a physical barrier is what we need for our kids.
Thank you. Councillor Hawke,
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for that presentation. And both of you have spoken with a lot of passion. I'm just wondering, do you frequent the park often, or is it?
My kids have gone past that stage now. I do wish it hadn't been there when my children were interested in parks. They have been in once last year and enjoyed the flying ones.
Okay. I was just wondering how often parents who've got young children actually go to the park. I know having had 3 children under 3 years old myself, that if you're in those awkward situations, you can't avoided them because it was just too difficult anyway.
Oh, and there are families that I've spoken to in the last 2 weeks that have said that they don't go there because it's not secure for their children, which means that it's not being fully utilised, which is why we spent all this money, why there was a great team of people that got all this money to build this fabulous resource and it's not being utilised.
Thank you.
Just a quick comment.
Could I ask you to please turn your microphone on, Councillor Swain? The reason being that we have people listening online and are unable to hear.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I take that reprimand, thank you. My concern is that are we setting up a playground or are we setting up a kindergarten?
I take on board exactly where you're coming from with that, Gay, and we had that conversation about supervision. You've got to be able to supervise your children, and really there should be a sign up, I reckon, saying if you're bringing your children in here, they actually need to be supervised whilst they're in there. There are parents already who leave their children run around unsupervised in the whole town, let alone there are other fenced playgrounds around, and they do exactly that. They shut them in and they'll go off and do something. They might actually go across the street to Woolies, but at least there's actually a gate. If there was a gate there, those parents will do it whether there's a fence and a gate or not.
Yeah, I guess my concern is from council's perspective, our liability of having the gates and being considered all the children are safe, and then someone leaves the gate open and the child gets out and then the parents sue us because the gates were left open.
You would assume that you would have a self-closing gate, absolutely, but I think in terms of risk mitigation, anyone that does risk management plans, that you can only have your best effort to mitigate a risk. If you can, you eliminate it because that's ultimately the best way to go about it. And the only way that we can minimise the risk of children getting out and onto that road or heading to be something else is to put a gate in. So it's about balance of risk and maintenance. Obviously, I know there's ongoing requirements for maintenance, but it's necessary.
Thanks, Councillor. I think Councillor Peake also has a question just before he speaks. I will remind councillors, elected members, that it's not a debate. It's just if you have a question or you need clarification on a point when it comes to addressing those presenting. Thank you, Councillor Peake.
And as much as that upsets me that it's not a debate all the time, in this time I have a very easy clarification. Mayor, a couple of times you've mentioned we had a conversation for my own benefit that we is referring to.
Which conversation?
So in answer to Councillor Swain's question
Oh,
on
sorry.
childcare, so you're referring to.
Yes, absolutely. I don't think that was minuted. There are some conversations that in the minutes weren't minuted, but yeah, we did have that conversation. I recall.
Thank you. Councillors, any further questions? No, thank you, Mr. Ryder. Councillors, look, we've had nearly an hour and 40 minutes of presentations. May I suggest that a motion from the floor for a 5-minute recess may be appropriate so we can gather ourselves before we actually start the debate. Councillor, seconded by Councillor Mason. Is that motion on favour? Against? Then the motion carried. See you back here in 5 minutes sharp.
They can't.